everyone. Today, I thought I've watched in the last few weeks, what should I say, the debate about RuPaul's Drag Race and how trans people need to be included. Actually, all forms of drag need to be included in the show. And, for a long time, I want to say that I'm a huge drag fan. Like, ever since I first saw my first drag show with Erica Andrews and Monique Johnson, it has been an amazing experience. And I first have to say that I guess since I was a child, I felt like I related to drag queens, and maybe that's because I was a child of the 80s and 90s, and there really was no trans people to look up to or to be relate to in media. I mean, my favorite movies, besides Pretty Woman and Still Magnolias, were Tu Wong Fu, Thanks for Everything, Julie Newmar, and Priscilla, Queen of the Desert. And I used to walk around the house singing Supermodel of the World, which was a RuPaul song. I guess in a lot of ways, I related to RuPaul and those movies. And even though Priscilla does have a trans character in there, which I related to a lot, I also didn't understand or grasp the meaning of being trans and what it meant for me. So, you know, when you're trans and you've transitioned, and people always like to ask you the question, when did you know you were trans? And for me, I never really knew when. There was no like, ta-da, I always knew since I was little. For me, I always knew I was different. And so now that I'm older, I'm about to be 40, it's taken me a long time to get to the place that I am today. And for me, it's been a lot of heartache and struggle. I started transitioning in 2000, a whole different world than it is today. The first drag show trans woman I ever met was in 1999, and that was Erica Andrews, which was a trans queen. So it all goes back around that, can trans people be on RuPaul's Drag Race, or should they even be allowed? I mean, a lot of people will say, we've already had a trans person on RuPaul's Drag Race. That was Peppermint. Of course that was Peppermint. But they downplayed her being trans. She, off camera, had to look, in a sense, masculine. And her story was foretold on RuPaul's Drag Race. But the reality is if you know Peppermint, or you were a fan of Peppermint, you knew Peppermint was trans before RuPaul's Drag Race. But it was never really discussed in that sense, because a lot of what I hear is because she didn't have breasts. So if we go back to looking at the evolution of drag and trans and all this stuff, and how my childhood relates to this story, is that for me, drag queens is who I wanted to be. I wanted to be in Priscilla. I still to this day want to go to Australia just because of Priscilla, Queen of the Desert. I've seen the Broadway version. It's just magical and special to me. So I'm foremost a drag fan. Drag, I love drag. When I watch drag, I love going to a drag show and being able to tip a girl, because especially a girl that's new, I want her to, I just want to be there and tip her and let her know that she's doing something wonderful, you know. Now that I'm older and I can do that, I love that. I love being able to tip a girl when she's performing. I love to buy the girls' merchandise or the guys' merchandise. I can't even say it's just about drag queens, because I'm a fan of drag kings. Houston has some of the best drag kings, and if you have not seen Houston H-Town's drag kings, Houston Drag Kings show at Pearl Bar, it's amazing. So I have to give a shout out to them. When I lived in Chicago, one of the first shows that allowed me to perform with them was the Drag King show. It was called the Boy Toys Show or something like that. And I got to be on that stage with them a couple times. I loved it. The boys treated me so special. And I love drag. And so when we go back to the whole thing of evolution, and you go back to the question, did you always know you were trans? When did you know you were trans? Those sort of things I never really knew. So now that I'm older and my relationship with my family is a little different, it's taken a long time for them, some of them, to come around. And I love my grandparents. I'm on my grandparents' property. I take care of my grandparents. They practically raised me when I was a kid. So for me, I ask a lot of questions like, what did you think when I was younger? Like, what did you think about me being effeminate and being flamboyant and all those things? And my grandma said that her and my dad used to talk about that I was a sissy. That's what they called me, a sissy. And she'll tell you they didn't know how a word and they didn't know anything. So when I came out as trans, a lot of people, I know my dad was upset and didn't want to talk to me for a while. But then he started watching home videos and seeing me as a kid, and then it all made sense. And then you go back to those conversations that you had with your mother about me, and you start to realize you always knew this was me. You just didn't have terminology back then for it. My family had no terminology. And so today when I talk to my family about trans kids, and I think they go, well, maybe it's too early or whatever. And I tell my grandma one day, I said, but look at me. Like, y'all called me a sissy. Like, you knew something was there. So if you would have had terminology and would have known that trans kids existed, would you have allowed that? So we don't know. But what I'm saying is that even after I transitioned in 2000, the world was so different. I remember moving to Chicago and thinking, oh my God, I get to be in Chicago where all the queens of Continental are. Because that's why I moved to Chicago. I went and helped dress a friend backstage at Miss Continental. It was my first time seeing the city. I fell in love with it. And I was like, I'm gonna move here one day. Because I used to want to be an actor and want to move to New York City and be on Broadway. But because I was trans, and I knew that that would hinder me from ever being able to act. So why not be a Miss Continental? And I moved to Chicago so I can be around Monica Monroe and Mimi Marks and Victoria LePage, and oh my God, it's just Chili Pepper. I mean, it's just everything I ever wanted was in Chicago. And so I moved to Chicago, and in the beginning of my transition, I don't know anybody, and I just find my way. And one of the first queens I met was my second drag mother. Angelique Monroe. Angelique Monroe is the drag daughter of Monica Monroe, which is a Continental legend and one of my favorite Continentals. And as younger, I used to sit and watch Continental videos and be like, I want to be like that. I want to wear that bathing suit. I want to do that. I want to walk that stage. I want to walk that crowd. You know, all those things that you see and you think, this is going to be amazing. And you get to Chicago and you want to work on a stage, but no one knows you. So, you know, your drag career that you had in Houston is not the same as in Chicago. You have to start all over. And then on top of it, you were trans. And in Boys Town, to get a gig at any bar, you had to do, I mean, I remember you had to either be a Continental girl or a girl that was already really, really popular in the city. Or you had to be in a competition. Like, you had to be in some kind of competition to get, and this was before RuPaul's Drag Race and all that stuff. There was certain competitions that you had each week. I know Roscoe's, they had this competition where you would perform each week, and then the crowd, and it was with Frito-Lay, and the place would be packed, and someone would win $100 or whatever, and the next week they'd come back, or however it was. I didn't want to compete. I mean, I wanted to compete in Continental, but I didn't want to compete in some drag contest just to get able to be on that stage. And then the more you started thinking about it, being trans was not really accepted unless you already won a title at Miss Continental, or if you were really popular at Miss Continental. Then you got to be on a stage in Boys Town. But the reality is that they wanted a boy to transform into drag. And that's how I got being able to be on shows with Angelique Monroe, because Angelique Monroe, at the time when I knew her, was not trans. But in her heart, she was trans. And she understood being trans and being an entertainer. So she would book me in her shows in Blue Island. You would get gigs if you were trans, but it was not in the city. It was not in Boys Town. You had to go to the suburbs. You had to go to Indiana, Wisconsin. That's where the trans girls got booked. And I remember I got hired at Hamburger Mary's in Chicago to host bingo night. I was really funny on the mic. I was really good on the mic. And, you know, I loved going to Hamburger Mary's. And I actually did a few shows at Hamburger Mary's up in the attic. But it was never any, it was just like because of the host, or I filled in for somebody. Or it was just like for tips. It was never, I wasn't on a cast at Hamburger Mary's. And I remember I got booked to host Monday nights. Originally, it was just me. And then they decided, we're gonna alternate you with a boy who is drag. And we're gonna see who does the best, basically. And I had some regulars who would come in and really liked me. And they were sad when they'd come the next week and I wasn't there and stuff like that. And it went good for a while. And then all of a sudden, basically, they just told me, we want a drag queen and you're not a drag queen. Even though I am a drag queen, I put on wigs and lots of makeup and costumes and themes and stuff like that. I felt discouraged and disappointed that they looked at me and was like, yeah, but just because you don't live as a boy, we can't. We'd rather go with the boy, even though maybe you're funny or on the mic or whatever. Maybe you draw in a crowd. But I wasn't drag. And the only time I was put in a show in Chicago was because I was friends with the show director. You know, Angelique Monroe was my drag mother. She put me in her shows. I was friends with the people and the show director at the bars in the suburbs, and I was friends with the trans or the drag kings in Chicago, and they put me in their shows. So I mean, that's how I got things. I mean, I had a permanent gig with my friend Teriyaki at Charlie's after they put me in their Spice Girls number for Milwaukee Pride. I was a last minute replacement for somebody, and I was to play Sporty Spice. I thought it was funny because I was the only trans in the group, and I was playing Sporty Spice. So it was fun, and after going to Milwaukee Pride with them and just impressing them, when Teriyaki got a show at Charlie's, I was on it, and I loved it. And I had so much fun, and I miss Chicago. And I see now that hopefully Chicago's changing in the sense of who they allow to be on stage, because they also didn't let a lot of black drag queens perform. I mean, it was very few and far between if you were in Boys Town and you were black. So I hope things are changing. So that's my little story, my little rundown on my drag history. And you know, after I left Chicago, I took a break from drag. I didn't even know if I was ever going to go back into performing again, to say the least. But drag always holds a place in my heart. Drag saved my life. It helped me become the person I am today. I did drag in high school and theater. It's part of who I am. So when a show like RuPaul's Drag Race says, you can't be eligible for the show because you are trans, because it won't be fair to the boys to compete. And so here's my first thing about drag. Drag is about transitioning. Drag isn't about being a boy and transforming into a girl, or being a girl and transforming into a boy. Drag is about transitioning something about you, or a part about you. May that be makeup, may that be hair, may that be costume. Cosplay is drag. And sometimes you can be a superhero and you're a male, cis male, just putting on a superhero costume. You're doing drag. That's not a big transformation, but you're transforming into that superhero. You are that superhero. That is drag. So drag is what you make it be. So when they say it's not fair for a trans woman to compete against a trans woman to compete against a cis male doing drag, because it's easier for a trans person to transform, because we already have the hips or the boobs or whatever. You're not even thinking really clearly, because if you look at Miss Continental, back to Miss Continental, a trans-dominated pageant. A handful of cis male men have won that pageant. Its majority is trans women representing that title. But they don't say, oh, you're a cis man, you can't be in this pageant. They come out and they compete with the trans girls. They wear the bathing suits like the trans girls. They do everything like the trans girls. So why can't the trans girl go on a show like RuPaul's Drag Race and compete in the same kind of context? Why? Because you say it's not fair? I've always watched RuPaul's Drag Race for the queens, because I've had friends on the show. I've never watched RuPaul's Drag Race for RuPaul. RuPaul disappointed me a long time ago when I met him in Chicago. And from then on, when you meet someone you look up to and they're not who they act like or appear to, you start to lose doubt. But I love drag so much, and I love seeing drag on TV, so I watch Drag Race for the competition, for the girls. I'm a fan of the girls. And I've got to meet so many of the girls from the show, even after the show. Like, I got to work with Jujubee 3 or 4 times at the T Awards. Love Jujubee. I've gotten to have conversations with Jujubee and be backstage with Jujubee and laugh with Jujubee and have fun with Jujubee. And so right now, watching season 5 of All Stars, I'm a Jujubee fan. Like, I want Jujubee to win. Jujubee is my girl. Like, I also love some other girls on there. Shea Coulee. Love Shea Coulee. I love Shea Coulee. Ever since her season, I have listened to every song Shea has put out. Blair St. Clair is another one I just love. So, but I don't know those two like I know Jujubee. So for me, Jujubee is who I'm rooting for, who I want to win or who I want to see. But to me, it doesn't matter who wins. I'm excited about the show. I'm excited about the contestants. I don't care less about RuPaul. So when we start this dialogue about trans women or RuPaul's Drag Race needs to be inclusive of all types of drag. I mean, look at the Boulet brothers, Dragula. The last season they had a cis woman on there. They had a drag king on there. So I mean, anything is possible. I'm a fan of Dragula. My issue with Dragula is that I liked season 1 the most. Season 2, okay. Season 3 felt really much manufactured. I wish it would go back to maybe like being in season 2-ish frame set. But other than that, I still love Dragula, and I love what the Boulet brothers are doing. I love drag. It doesn't matter what type of drag it is. I love drag. And that's what I loved about the Boulet brothers. Drag is your interpretation. It's, you can't critique drag. Like, you can, but then you can't. So it's like, it's all in the eye of the beholder. It's like art. It's like some people are not gonna like a Monet, but they may like a Picasso. You can't compare the two. And drag's the same way. You can't compare drag. But you should be able to compete against each other in the same sense. We're all in the same community. Man, I've seen some cis women do drag that I'm just blown away. Like, I'm blown away. And like I said, I know some of the best drag kings, and they live in fucking Houston, Texas, and they're featured in my music video, Kings and Queens, because I love them so much. And I can't wait till the day that the coronavirus goes away and I can be back in that environment with them, because they bring me so much joy. So I want to just say, when you think about saying a trans person or a cis person or a cis woman, let's say, or I'm a drag king, can't compete on RuPaul's Drag Race, think long and hard about what I just talked about. I mean, there's only one place, one pageant in the United States, drag-wise, that you cannot be trans, and that is Miss America, Miss Gay America. But Continental is very trans, and cis boys come and work it with the trans girls. And then I think, and I look at the show, someone said, oh, well, trans girls have so much work done. It's easy. And then I look at someone like Trinity the Tuck, which I love Trinity the Tuck so much. Has more work than me. Has a lot more work than me. And I can't breathe when I'm done getting ready for drag. I put on a fucking corset and suck it in and tie it and heels and hose and everything. I do everything. My head hurts after pinning a fucking wig in my head. those sort of things. I do the same thing. I have to tuck. I have to do the same thing. I just have breasts and some hips. Whoop-dee. You can just throw on a breastplate. Got better breasts than me anyways. So that's my rant about drag and RuPaul's Drag Race. And I know people say don't watch RuPaul's Drag Race because you're supporting the enemy. And then you go on Twitter and you see RuPaul has deleted everything on his Twitter. He's basically gone radio silent. And you're like, why is that? And he hasn't spoken out about anything about Black Lives Matter or anything. But they done someone really dirty on that show, The Vixen. But they're preaching about Black Lives Matter on All Stars Season 5 and during last season at the end. And you thought, is it the producers? Is it VH1? Is this what's doing it? Because that sure is not how RuPaul feels. Because if it's not about RuPaul, then what is it? And he's gone radio silent and hasn't said a word. And now he's deleted every tweet. He's a coward. And doesn't want to face the reality of all the things he said in the past. He's eating his words now. And society is done with him. And so, going to Canada's Drag Race, I sat and watched Twitter with Mistress Sarah Andrews, who I'm a fan of, along with James Majesty from Dragula. So I've been really interacting with them on Twitter lately. You know, we've been going back and forth about, you know, RuPaul's Drag Race and watching it, not watching it, stuff like that, and how they need to be inclusive to everybody on the competition, and how they're trying to get RuPaul to say something. RuPaul doesn't say anything. And so I think it was Sarah or someone was bringing up that we need to put another host in RuPaul's Drag Race. They do it in Thailand, and they do it in, they're now doing it in Canada with Brooklyn Heights, which, mind you, Brooklyn Heights is a former Miss Continental, a cis boy who competed with the trans girls and won the second time he went. So, it's how you know and how you work the game. But anyway, so I watched the first episode of Canada's Drag Race, and I wanted to give my rundown of it. And I have to say, I really like it. I really liked UK's Drag Race this past year, last year as well. I love the queens of different countries. It's like, wow, here I'm an American going, wow, I get to see some new styles of drag or a new take on drag. And so Canada's Drag Race really brought that in for me. I liked so many of the queens on the show. One of my favorite queens, I have to say, coming out of the first episode is Tynomi Banks. Gorgeous, love her. They say she's a legend in Toronto. So, and then Boa was another one I really liked. Scarlett Bobo. I was really kind. Just, kind was way too much for me, and I feel like they're gonna be the queen on this season that people are gonna hate, and it's gonna become that way if they stay on long. I felt like Kind should have left. The two girls in the bottom should have not been in the bottom. Kind should have went home, and Juicebox should have stayed. That's just clearly my opinion, so I'm sorry if you haven't watched the episode, but I just told you who went home. But I love Juicebox, and I hope something comes out of this for Juicebox. It's a really good show, and it just shows you that RuPaul does not have to host Drag Race. It can be his show. He can do the little interludes that he does in Canada's Drag Race. He, like, dubs over and says things and appears on the screen and the maxi challenge, whatever challenge, I can't remember now why I'm talking, but it just shows you that it's possible to do a show without having RuPaul on it. Maybe RuPaul needs to walk away from the show and we need to have other hosts like what they're doing in Canada and Thailand. It just needs to be something different. And then open the doors for trans and other forms of drag to be on the show. So, drag has been around forever. And if you look at Stonewall, most of the drag queens were either non-conforming or they were trans, but there was no terminology for it. So the reality is that RuPaul and so many other people have what they have because of trans entertainers, like DQs from Stonewall and before. Back in World War II, in the Holocaust, drag queens were a thing in Berlin. It was big. It was all over. You could, go to the shows in Berlin and see drag queens doing burlesque and stuff like that. I bet you most of those, if they were alive today or if they lived through it, they would be non-conforming or trans. I highly suspect that word just wasn't around back then. And if you watch a movie like Bent, which is based on a play, the play version featured Richard Gere on Broadway, which is what got his start in movies and stuff like that. But the movie stars Gerard Butler, and the person in there that plays a drag queen is Mick Jagger. So if you have not seen that movie, go see it. It's touching. It shows you really what gay people had to deal with in the Holocaust, because being gay was even worse than being a Jew. And so life was totally different. Drag has been around forever. And drag can be so many different ways. I mean, look at Mulan. She was doing drag. And drag has always been there. And I think trans people and other forms of drag need to be introduced into the mainstream TV. So I want to thank you all for listening to this week's episode. I appreciate it. I hope you click and subscribe and leave a comment wherever you listen to my podcast, and share it with your friends. And let's get this dialogue started. Write me on my website, kennedymonroe.com. You can send me an email at km@kennedymonroe.com. You can also find me on Twitter at Kennedy Monroe. You can find me on Facebook at Kennedy Monroe. You can find me on Instagram as Kennedy, and you can find me on TikTok as Kennedy Monroe. Very basic and easy. And if you go to my website, you can get all those links, and you can find me on YouTube, where I do a topic of the week video on Thursdays, a makeup tutorial on Saturdays, and of course this podcast drops right on YouTube as well. So please click subscribe, like, share, tell your friends, because you sharing it helps this wonderful show continue. So please do that. And if you would like to further, like I said, further the dialogue, let's talk on social media. And if there's something you want me to talk about, feel free to message me as well. And I look forward to seeing you next week, or being back here for you next week. Like, I'm gonna see you. I don't get to see you, it's virtual, but from my RV bedroom. I'm Kennedy Monroe. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your week. Bye.